They say the truth will set you free, but when it comes to VA claims, the truth can sometimes feel like it's buried under red tape, rushed exams, and paperwork written in language designed to confuse you. If you've ever walked into a compensation and pension exam and walked out feeling like the decision was already made, you're not imagining things. There's a hidden reason behind that gut feeling, and most veterans never hear about it until it's too late. It's not just bad luck. It's not just a tough examiner. There's something deeper going on, a quiet pattern built into the very structure of how these exams are handled. A pattern that can tilt the odds against you before you ever speak a word. In this video, we're going to uncover 6 shocking ways your C&P exam might already be biased, and more importantly, what you can do to protect yourself. This isn't fear-mongering, it's the reality far. Too many veterans discover only after their claim gets denied. Whether you're preparing for your first exam, fighting an appeal, or just trying to understand what really happens behind those closed doors, stay with me. Because knowing this ahead of time could save you months, sometimes years, of frustration, rejections, and missed benefits. Let's start with the first red flag. And trust me, it's one most veterans never see coming. The first red flag? Your examiner might not even be a VA employee. A growing number of C&P exams are outsourced to third-party contractors, private medical professionals who are paid to assess your condition, but often have little to no experience with the realities of military service or the VA system itself. And here's where it gets tricky. These contractors are under pressure to move fast. They're evaluated on speed, not depth. That means your exam, which could determine the outcome of your entire claim, might be squeezed into a 15-minute window. 15 minutes to discuss years or decades of pain, trauma, or disability. It's not just unfair, it's designed to favor the system, not the veteran. Even worse, some of these examiners rely heavily on templates and checklists. Instead of asking thoughtful, detailed questions about your experience, they may simply click through a preset form and leave little room for context or clarification. If you don't speak up clearly, concisely, and assertively, your real story can get lost in a report that barely scratches the surface. This is where many veterans go silent, not out of weakness, but out of confusion. They assume the examiner knows what they're doing. They trust the process, but in reality, the process might be stacked against them before they even sit down. If you're facing a C&P exam soon, here's the takeaway. Never assume the person across the table knows your background, your symptoms, or how your service connects to your current health. Walk in prepared to educate them. Speak up, bring evidence, and don't downplay your pain. Because the system may not give you the time you deserve, and if you're not ready, that short exam could lead to a long denial. But rushed contractors are only part of the problem. What happens when the examiner writes things down that you never said? Or worse, leaves out what you did? That's where things start to get even more dangerous. One of the most dangerous traps in a C&P exam isn't what's said out loud. It's what gets written down afterward. Many veterans walk out of the exam room thinking it went well. They were polite, answered every question honestly, explained their symptoms clearly. But when the report comes back, it's a completely different story. Key details are missing. Important symptoms were never mentioned. Sometimes statements are twisted or oversimplified in a way that downplays the severity of what you're dealing with. And in some cases, the report includes things you never actually said. How does that happen? Simple. The examiner holds the pen, and whatever they write becomes the official record. There's no transcript, no video, no audio, just their notes. If they miss something, misinterpret your answers, or decide your symptoms don't seem credible, that subjective opinion carries real weight in the VA's decision-making process. Imagine describing chronic pain that keeps you up at night, only to read a report that says, "Veteran appears comfortable, no distress observed." Or explaining how your PTSD affects your daily life, only to find the phrase, Veteran reports mild symptoms, no functional impairment. It happens more often than people think. And once it's in writing, it becomes your reality, whether it's accurate or not. This is why documentation matters so much. If you go into your exam without your own records, your own symptom log, your own written statement, you're putting the entire claim in the hands of someone who met you for 15 minutes and may never see you again. You need to walk in with a clear plan, not just hope they'll get it. And if something feels off after the exam, if the report doesn't match what was actually said, you have the right to challenge it. But it's much easier to do that if you made your own notes immediately after the exam. Date it. Write what was discussed. Keep your own version of the truth, because sometimes it's the only record that reflects what really happened. But even if everything gets written down perfectly, there's still another layer of bias, hiding in plain sight, one that's built into the very way C&P examiners are trained to think. And once you understand it, you'll never look at these exams the same way again. There's a quiet bias built into the C&P exam process, and most veterans don't even realize it's there. It starts with the assumption that the examiner's job is to be neutral. But what does that actually mean? In practice, it often means looking for reasons not to connect your condition to your service. Instead of giving you the benefit of the doubt, some examiners approach your claim like it needs to be disproved, not understood. This mindset is especially dangerous when it comes to conditions that aren't visible, like PTSD, migraines, chronic pain, or Gulf War illness. These don't show up on X-rays, they don't leave physical scars. And because they rely on your word and your history, the examiner's personal judgment plays a massive role. If you're calm and collected during the appointment, they might assume you're fine. If you don't cry, shake, or break down, they might write that you showed no emotional distress, as if suffering only counts when it's loud and dramatic. It gets worse when you realize how these assumptions can influence the entire exam. Some veterans are seen as more credible simply because they fit a certain image: older, visibly injured, emotionally detached. Others, especially those who are younger, more articulate, or don't appear to be in pain, might be dismissed, consciously or not, as exaggerating. This isn't always malicious, it's often unconscious. But the result is the same: a biased report that shapes your future. Now ask yourself this: how do you fight a bias you can't see? You bring your own evidence. You explain your worst days, not just your best. You speak clearly about the patterns, not just the symptoms. And you remind yourself that it's okay to be uncomfortable, vulnerable, or emotional. You don't have to perform your pain, but you do have to make it known. Because until the system stops judging veterans by how they look and starts listening to how they live, the burden will keep falling on you to tell the whole story. And if you think the examiner will do that for you, you might be setting yourself up for a denial that has nothing to do with the truth. But bias doesn't just live inside the room. In some cases, it's baked into the very policies that guide how your claim is evaluated. Most veterans assume the C&P examiner is there to help them get a fair evaluation. But what they don't realize is that many of these providers are under pressure to follow internal guidelines that quietly favor the VA. These aren't official rules printed in bold. They're subtle expectations shaped by budget concerns, workload quotas, and years of unspoken practice. And they influence how your exam is conducted, how your symptoms are interpreted, and ultimately, whether your claim gets approved or denied. Here's the part no one talks about. Many examiners are third-party contractors. They're not VA employees. They don't know your full history, and they may be seeing 10 or more veterans in a single day. That means less time, more shortcuts, and often a checklist mentality. They're expected to gather just enough information to complete a Disability Benefits Questionnaire, or DBQ. But they aren't always trained to understand the complexity of service-related conditions. They're trained to meet metrics. This can lead to reports that look thorough on paper but miss the full picture. For example, you might explain that your back pain flares up so badly you can't stand for long periods. But if, during the exam, you happen to stand up and walk across the room, they might write, "Veteran ambulated without difficulty." One moment gets taken out of context and turned into a summary judgment. It's efficient, but it's not fair. Even worse, some veterans report being rushed through exams, interrupted mid-sentence, or discouraged from elaborating. When the system prioritizes volume over accuracy, the human details get lost. The suffering becomes data, and the outcome becomes predictable. This is why it's critical to understand the examiner's perspective. Not so you can manipulate it, but so you can prepare for it. You need to bring clarity to a process that often runs on autopilot. Be ready to slow the examiner down. Be firm about explaining how your symptoms actually impact your life, not just how you feel on that particular day. The more specific and grounded your answers, the harder they are to twist or overlook. Because here's the truth. The VA isn't always the villain, but the system they've built can quietly turn in on itself. If you don't speak up and advocate for yourself, no one else will do it for you. And if you think that's the worst part, what you learn next might leave you questioning the entire process from the start. There's something deeply unsettling that many veterans discover only after a denial. Your entire C&P exam, the one that determines your future benefits, might have been based on incomplete or outdated information. And in most cases, you're not told that up front. You're led to believe the examiner had full access to your medical history, your service records, your symptom patterns. But the truth is, what they actually see can vary wildly depending on how your file was prepared and how much time they had to review it. Some examiners only skim your records. Others rely almost entirely on what you say during that brief 20 to 30-minute appointment. And if your claim involves something complex, like a mental health condition, a traumatic brain injury, or multiple chronic pain issues, there's simply no way to grasp the full picture in such a short window. But the system doesn't account for that. The examiner checks the boxes, signs the form, and moves on. Meanwhile, your future hangs on a paragraph that barely scratches the surface. Even worse, if your medical records weren't fully uploaded or synced in the system before your exam, the provider might never see key evidence that could support your claim. Hospital visits, test results, past diagnoses, gone. And unless you brought printed copies yourself and insisted they be reviewed, they may never be part of the decision at all. That's not just a mistake. That's a structural flaw, and it happens more often than anyone wants to admit. Now imagine trying to appeal a denial that was based on a snapshot of your life, while the full story sat buried in a digital file no one opened. That's the reality for too many veterans. This is why preparation isn't optional. It's essential. Before your C&P exam, you need to gather the most relevant records yourself. Highlight the key pieces, bring copies, and make sure the examiner actually sees them, not just assumes they're in the system. Don't rely on the process to do its job. You have to build the narrative. You have to make it impossible for them to ignore the facts. Because if you walk in unprepared, you're putting your future in the hands of someone who might not even know the half of what you've been through. And as you're about to see, sometimes the biggest threat isn't just what's missing. It's what gets misinterpreted entirely. One of the most damaging parts of the C&P process isn't what's said, it's what gets misunderstood. You might walk into that exam thinking, "I'll just tell the truth. That's enough." But here's where things get dangerous. Many veterans don't realize how certain words or phrases can be twisted, minimized, or taken out of context by the examiner. You think you're explaining your pain, your trauma, your daily struggle. But what ends up in the report might sound nothing like what you actually meant. Take mental health claims, for example. If you say, "I try to stay busy," thinking it shows that you're fighting to cope, that effort might be misread as a sign that you're functioning well. If you admit you don't like talking about what happened in service, it can be spun into, Veteran is guarded, but not in acute distress. If you describe your anxiety as manageable, even though it ruins your sleep, ruins your focus, and keeps you from working, that one word, manageable, could sink your entire claim. Because in the examiner's language, that often translates to not severe, and physical conditions are no different. You might say, it hurts when I move, but I push through it, trying to show strength and resilience. But what they write might be, veteran ambulates without difficulty. One moment, one comment, one glance, turned into a clinical summary that tells a completely different story. The worst part? You don't get to see what they're writing during the exam. You won't know how your words were interpreted until weeks later when the report comes in, if you're lucky enough to even get a copy. And by then, the damage is done. That's why clarity is your best weapon. Be specific. Don't downplay your pain to appear tough. Don't use vague language that can be reinterpreted. Say exactly how your condition affects you day to day, what you can't do anymore, what you avoid, what you've had to give up. Be honest, but be direct. Because no one else is going to connect the dots for you. The C&P process isn't built to understand nuance. It's built to assess quickly, check boxes, and move on. So if your story doesn't jump off the page with unmistakable clarity, it might as well be invisible. And if you think that's the worst of it, the final section might reveal the most overlooked and most powerful step you can take to protect yourself before it's too late. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's that the C&P exam is not just a routine appointment. It's one of the most critical moments in your VA journey. What happens in that short, often uncomfortable meeting can shape your benefits, your health care, access, and your peace of mind for years to come. And yet, no one prepares you for how biased, rushed, or misunderstood it can be. You're told to just tell the truth, but not warned that the truth can be misheard, minimized, or lost in translation. You're sent to exams by contractors who don't know your story, judged by systems that prioritize speed over accuracy, and left out of the loop when it matters most. But now you know what most veterans don't. You know the red flags to look for. You understand how the process works behind the curtain, and most importantly, you've seen that there are ways to protect yourself through preparation, documentation, clarity, and follow-up. You served with strength. That hasn't changed. But in this next battle, for the benefits you've earned, you need to advocate with just as much focus, because no one's going to fight for your claim harder than you will. If this video helped open your eyes or gave you something useful to hold on to, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. What part resonated with you most? Or if you've been through a C&P exam yourself, share your experience so others can learn from it too. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and turning on the bell. Your support helps us continue creating honest, practical content to guide and empower veterans just like you. Thank you for spending your time here today. Stay informed, stay strong, and remember, you're not alone in this. We'll see you in the next video.